You picture medieval torture from Game of Thrones. Iron Maidens, dramatic confessions, heroes who never break. You think you understand medieval justice from history books and documentaries, but that's complete fiction. Forget everything you know. They weren't random sadists. They were precision psychologists who could shatter your mind in minutes. What I'm about to reveal will horrify you, because medieval torturers understood human breaking points better than modern doctors. The torturer doesn't start with pain. That's your first misconception. Welcome to medieval psychological warfare, where the real torture began the moment you were dragged from your cell. This wasn't some sadistic dungeon master improvising cruelty. Medieval torture was a precise science practiced by specialists who understood human psychology better than most modern therapists. These weren't brutal savages. They were methodical technicians of terror. The process began with anticipation. You'd be led past other prisoners, forced to hear their screams, shown the instruments that would be used on you. This wasn't accidental. It was calculated psychological preparation designed to break your resistance before physical torture even began. Torturers were trained to read micro-expressions, to identify exactly when a person's mental defenses started cracking. They knew that the human mind had predictable breaking points, and they'd mapped every single one. Sleep deprivation came first. Not as punishment, but as a systematic assault on cognitive function. Prisoners were kept awake for days using techniques that would make CIA-enhanced interrogation look primitive. They understood that an exhausted mind couldn't maintain deception or resistance. But here's what separates medieval torture from every movie you've watched. The goal was never punishment. It was information extraction with surgical precision. They'd spend weeks studying you before the real torture began. Learning your fears, your relationships, your psychological vulnerabilities. Every scream was documented, every breaking point catalogued for future reference. And what they discovered about the human mind's capacity for suffering would make modern psychology textbooks read like children's stories. Forget the Iron Maiden. Seriously, throw that Hollywood image out of your head right now. The torturer's primary tools weren't dramatic contraptions designed for quick kills. They were precision instruments calibrated to inflict maximum suffering while keeping you alive and conscious for hours. The rack wasn't meant to stretch you until you died. That would be wasteful. It was engineered to dislocate joints incrementally, one tendon at a time, while trained operators monitored your pulse to ensure you remained conscious throughout the process. Medieval torturers understood human anatomy better than most doctors. They knew exactly how much pressure each joint could withstand before permanent damage occurred. They could dislocate your shoulder in precisely controlled increments, allowing natural healing between sessions to maximize total suffering time. But even the rack was considered crude compared to their true masterpiece: temperature, torture. Hot iron wasn't randomly applied. Torturers knew that certain nerve clusters produce more pain than others. They'd mapped the human body's pain receptors with scientific precision, applying heat in sequences designed to overwhelm your nervous system without causing death. Cold torture was even more sophisticated. Prisoners were subjected to temperature variations that induced hypothermia while keeping them conscious. They learned that a human mind experiencing severe cold becomes more susceptible to psychological manipulation. But here's the truly terrifying part. Medieval torturers developed techniques specifically for different types of information extraction. They had specialized methods for religious confessions, political intelligence, and criminal admissions. Each technique was designed to exploit specific psychological vulnerabilities. What they learned about breaking a human resistance would make interrogation manuals today seem like amateur psychology. Your mind breaks long before your body fails. Medieval torturers understood this with scientific precision. Welcome to fighting something that's essentially a human psychology expert with centuries of refined techniques for mental demolition. Torturers weren't random sadists. They were trained specialists who underwent years of apprenticeship learning human psychology. Each torturer specialized in different breaking methods. Some focused on physical pain, others on psychological manipulation, others on spiritual destruction. The psychological torture was more brutal than any physical technique. prisoners were forced to watch family members tortured, not because the information was needed from relatives, but because witnessing loved ones suffer destroyed resistance faster than personal pain. They developed techniques for attacking your sense of reality. Sleep deprivation combined with sensory manipulation would induce hallucinations. Then torturers would convince you that your hallucinations were real memories of confessing to crimes. But if you think they relied only on pain, you'd be wrong. Medieval torturers understood that humans could adapt to physical suffering, but they never adapted to uncertainty and hope manipulation. They would grant unexpected mercy, provide comfortable meals, allow rest, then resume torture without warning. This psychological whiplash prevented mental adaptation and kept victims in a state of constant terror anticipation. The most skilled torturers could break someone without leaving physical marks. They understood that mental torture created more reliable confessions because the victim's will was completely destroyed, not just their pain tolerance. But here's the truly terrifying part. They used mercy as a weapon. Temporary relief wasn't kindness. It was calibrated psychological manipulation designed to make the return to suffering more devastating than continuous pain. What they learned about the human mind's breaking points created something far more horrific than any torture device: a complete understanding of how to destroy someone's will to resist. Medieval torturers didn't just extract confessions, they manufactured them with assembly line precision. Medieval torture wasn't about truth, it was about producing specific narratives that served political, religious, or legal purposes. Torturers were trained to guide victims toward predetermined confessions while making the process feel like voluntary admission. They understood that humans would confess to anything to stop suffering, but random confessions weren't useful. Skilled torturers could manipulate victims into providing detailed, coherent, false confessions, complete with accomplices, methods, and motivations that never existed. The process was systematic. First, establish basic guilt through physical torture. Second, expand the confession through psychological manipulation. Third, implicate others through strategic questioning designed to create networks of supposed conspirators. Torture sessions were documented with bureaucratic precision. Every technique used, every response recorded, every breaking point catalogued. This wasn't random cruelty, it was systematic data collection designed to improve future torture effectiveness. Religious torture was particularly sophisticated. Torturers working for church authorities developed specialized techniques for extracting heresy confessions, complete with theological details the victim had never learned. They could implant false memories of attending heretical meetings, performing blasphemous rituals, or teaching forbidden doctrines. But even all of this pales compared to what separated medieval torture from every other interrogation method in history: their understanding of how to make victims grateful for their own destruction. Advanced psychological conditioning could make prisoners genuinely believe they deserved punishment, that their torturers were helping them achieve spiritual purification through suffering. Look into a medieval torture victim's eyes after weeks of conditioning, and you'd see something that would haunt you forever. Medieval torturers achieved something modern psychology considers nearly impossible. They made victims psychologically dependent on their tormentors. This wasn't Stockholm Syndrome. This was deliberate psychological reconstruction that replaced the victim's original personality with one designed to serve their captor's needs. The process began with complete isolation from reality. Victims lost track of time, location, and even their own identity. In this psychological void, torturers became the only source of human interaction, creating artificial dependency relationships. They didn't just break resistance, they rebuilt victims' psychological frameworks around gratitude for mercy, relief at survival, and genuine belief that confession had provided spiritual salvation. Advanced techniques could convince victims that torture had revealed hidden truths about themselves they'd been suppressing. People would genuinely believe they'd been living in denial about crimes they'd never committed. The most skilled torturers could create what they called voluntary prisoners. People so psychologically destroyed and reconstructed that they'd confess to new crimes without being tortured, genuinely believing they were helping society by revealing their supposed guilt. Modern psychologists studying historical torture records found evidence of conditioning techniques that wouldn't be formally understood until centuries later. Medieval torturers had empirically discovered psychological principles that academic psychology wouldn't identify until the 20th century. So when you imagine medieval torture, understand what you're really imagining: precision psychological warfare conducted by specialists who understood human mental breaking points better than we understand them today. You wouldn't just break physically, you'd be systematically reconstructed into someone grateful for your own destruction, convinced that your torture had been necessary salvation. The real horror wasn't the pain, it was waking up thanking them for it. And that's the true nightmare. Medieval torture wasn't chaos, it was structure. Every scream was data, every broken mind a case study. What we see as barbarism was in fact a clinical system of psychological engineering centuries ahead of its time. They didn't just destroy bodies, they rewired identities, turning human beings into willing architects of their own damnation.